All right. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you. That's the appropriate response. My name is Jeff. I'll be your tour guide today as we float down this Chicago River. How you guys doing?
Good.
Good. It's like a low moaning noise. Take that as approval. So, looks like got a few more people coming here. And should be getting on our way here. Never leave a man behind. It's Shoreline's motto. Also, never leave a ticket unsold, so they go hand in hand. But I'll get my name tag on here. Alright, so looks like we're going to get going here now. To get you all started off in a very general sense, if we look off to our left, there it is. Chicago. My work here is done. I'll be down at the bar with Albert, playing Angry Birds on my phone for the rest of the hour. That's why I'm the best. Now, I usually like to start just by pointing out this little plot of land that's off to our left. It's surrounded by that low white wall. There's not a whole lot going on there right now, but that's supposed to be the future site of DuSable Park, which would commemorate this area's very first permanent resident, Mr. Jean-Baptiste DuSable. He came here around 1779 in order to establish trade with the Native Americans. And not very much is known about Mr. DuSable. It is known that he was of French as well as Haitian descent. But besides that, just he was the very first permanent resident of the Chicagoland area, and eventually get a nice riverfront park there to honor that man. For the time being, the boat harbor, kind of off behind us now, is known as DuSable Harbor. And just a couple years back, Michigan Avenue Bridge was renamed DuSable Bridge. So all in honor of that very first permanent resident of the Chicagoland area. Alright, the ramp's going to go down again, this time I think for good. So we'll get going here now. I've said this before, but I mean it this time. I also like to mention this boat slip we're going to be leaving from here. It's this little L-shaped patch of water we find ourselves in here. And it's known as the Ogden Slip, and it pays tribute to Chicago's first mayor, Mr. William Butler Ogden. He came here around 1835 to watch over some land that his brother bought in the area. But when he got here, he found himself knee-deep in mud, as well as the place smelled quite a bit. Chicago was nothing more than a swamp. So Mr. Ogden immediately wrote back to his brother, saying that they had been swindled, and he would try to sell off the land as fast as he could. He would sell just a third of that land for about 3 times its original value, so essentially making up for the entire purchase by just selling off a little chunk of that land. And I like to think that it was around that time Mr. Ogden might have realized that there's something to this place, decided to stick around. He would stick around, and just a couple of years, by 1837, Chicago would find itself in need of a mayor, as we were incorporated into a city, and Mr. Ogden would fulfill that need, bidding out John Kinsey, famous fur trader in the area, for that first mayoral spot. Since we have a little extra time here, you may or may not have visited Navy Pier here already. Maybe you plan on doing it later. Originally, this was part of Daniel Burnham's plan of the city of Chicago in 1909. He envisioned a whole bunch of piers shooting out into the lake. This is Municipal Pier 2. Municipal Pier 1 was never actually built. But Navy Pier was done by Charles Sumner Frost in 1916. Originally a freight pier, and it served as a naval training base during the Second World War. It also served as University of Illinois at Chicago's campus for a little while, actually serving as a college campus there. It kind of fell into disuse for quite a few years. Then in the 1990s, it was renovated, turned into the tourist attraction here today. I believe the #1 tourist spot in Illinois. And there's all sorts of stuff on the pier. The Ferris wheels, the standout. And you have the tented area next door, which is home to the Cirque du Shanghai. They perform in there. And then the Shakespeare Theater is beyond that. There's a stained glass museum that's free to walk through. A children's museum. Billy Goat Tavern is a personal favorite of mine. All sorts of stuff on the pier now. But we are going to be floating down this Chicago River here. It's actually a pretty important river. If it wasn't for this Chicago River, we might not have a city here at all. The story goes all the way back to 1673, if you can imagine. Back to 2 French explorers went to map out the Mississippi. Their names were Jacques Marquette and Louis Joliet. They went all the way down south, down the Mississippi. On the way back up north, they had a Native American guide. Showed a little shortcut. As if you took the Mississippi River into the Illinois River, and the Illinois into the Des Plaines River, you could then pick up your canoe or whatever boating vessel you're on that day, and carry it for about a mile. You'd reach this little 2 foot deep, about 4 foot wide, sort of weed-choked stream, just kind of trickled into Lake Michigan off behind us. And of course, this little stream is what would become this great Chicago River. And that's about 20 to 25 feet deep, maybe as much as 200, 250 feet across the area up here. And it's nothing that nature intended. And we have had our way with the Chicago River, building it to suit our needs, as we tend to do here as humans. But again, when the French came, nothing more than this small trickling stream, but they immediately saw the great potential of this Chicago River, and see if you could just dig a canal near the south end of this river and connect it to that Des Plaines River. You'd have the key to a vast inland trade route, essentially connecting the east coast in through the Great Lakes and going all the way through to the Gulf of Mexico, all via waterways. This would not work out for the French, but it would work out for the United States. That newly formed state of Illinois in 1830 would finally propose the building of that canal to be called the Illinois-Michigan Canal. It was after proposing that canal that Chicago got its start. Now, off to our left, a little bit in front of us, there's that gray building, strong vertical lines running up it. That's the Aon Center. It's the third tallest building standing here in Chicago, 1,136 feet to the roof. Now, before that was the third tallest building standing here in Chicago. When it was done in 1973 by Edward Durrell Stone, it was the first tallest marble-clad building in the world. And not just any marble, Carrara marble from the Carrara Quarry in Italy. Michelangelo got his marble to do sculptures such as David and others. As you can imagine, that building was very beautiful, white, opulent Carrara marble gleaming off the surface. As you may also imagine, marble is very fragile, and going through some very cold Chicago winters and very hot Chicago summers, that marble was expanding and contracting, and eventually buckled, and was in danger of raining down precious Carrara marble onto pedestrians' heads beneath. And while nobody wanted to see a bunch of crushed pedestrians, they had to go out, take down all that marble, and reclad the building in the homegrown North Carolina granite, adorning its facade today. Off to our right, we have Centennial Fountain. This is meant to commemorate 100 years since the founding of Chicago's Metropolitan Water Reclamation District. That district was founded in 1889. Centennial Fountain, of course, completed in 1989, 100 years later. There is that water spout out in front of Centennial Fountain. Shoots that giant arc of water across the river here. Goes off just about every hour, on the hour, for a solid 10 minutes. Essentially halting boat traffic for 10 minutes every hour. Plan all of our trips around that fountain. The only 2 hours a day it doesn't go off, 3 and 4 o'clock in the afternoon. For some reason those 2 hours doesn't go off. But every other hour, giant arc of water shooting across the river. Now, off to our right, we have this Sheraton Hotel. I'd like to mention the green tinted windows here. This is a postmodern building, and postmodernism is known for its contextualism. It's just a big fancy word, meaning it pays tribute to its location. Now, Sheraton Hotel is paying tribute to its location here on the Chicago River by those green tinted windows, meant to reflect the natural green color of this Chicago River. And it is a natural green due to the algae, kind of floats in here, gives it that greenish hue. Now it does get a brighter green every St. Patrick's Day, and we do dye it a little bit brighter green. Now another really big idea in postmodernism is to look back on old styles of architecture and to reinvent them with your newly found resources. No better example of that than this NBC tower straight off to our right, done by Adrian Smith of Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in 1989. The NBC Tower harkens back to the old Art Deco days, late 1920s. Art Deco was known for its soaring vertical lines. The NBC Tower accomplishes by those darkened spandrels separating the windows there. Give a very machine-like look. Might also notice about 2/3 of the way up the building there, those upside-down L's look like big holes in the building. Those are known as flying buttresses, and they are paying tribute to the flying buttresses on the Chicago Tribune Tower, which is a near neighbor. We'll see her in just a moment. For now, we have this University of Chicago Gleacher Center, the building with the beautiful riverfront view. Notice off to the side, there aren't really any windows to speak of. That's because this is home to the University of Chicago's Graduate School of Business. And those are the students' classrooms. The architect Dirk Lohan didn't think the students needed to be daydreaming out the windows of their classrooms should be learning. But now we have this Chicago Tribune Tower here, those flying buttresses at the top that the NBC Tower was paying tribute to in its design. In 1922, Colonel Robert R. McCormick held a contest to see who could design the most beautiful office building in the world. The winners were Howells and Hood, this design, modeled after the Butter Tower of the Rouen Cathedral in France. They won $100,000 for their design. Now coming up to the Wrigley Building here, home to the Chewing Gum King. The Wrigley Building is actually two buildings connected on the 3rd as well as the 14th floor by a couple bridges. It is known for its beautifully white glazed terracotta tiles that glow in the night when they're all lit up here. Also known for the clock tower at the top, modeled after the Giralda Tower in Sevilla, Spain. Then we have this fairly recent addition to our skyline here. This is Trump's building, Trump International Hotel and Tower, also known as where Derrick Rose lives. And it's a pretty tall one. I think all the way to the tip of the spire on the top of Trump's building, which, architecturally speaking, spires do count in the height of a building. Now, antennae do not. I'm not sure what the distinction is there. One of them is functional, one is decorational. The decorational one counts. And if you go all the way to the tip of that spire, it's 1,389 feet, officially making Trump's building the second tallest building here in the city of Chicago. Now, but Trump's building has a few setbacks as you go up it. These setbacks are referencing the heights of the surrounding buildings. You have the first setback, the height of the Wrigley Building. The next setback's at the height of the Marina City Towers, a couple doors down. Then the final setback's at the height of this old IBM building, standing right next door here. This is the tallest and final of some 60 buildings the architect Ludwig Mies van der Rohe did here in the city of Chicago. Now, Mies van der Rohe was known as the father of the modern school of architecture. He coined the phrase, less is more, or God is in the details. Very simplistic, inornate designs to his buildings. And most of this glass and steel box look is the general idea. And the beauty was supposed to be in the simplicity of it all. Now, Mies van der Rohe taught at the Bauhaus in Germany up until the 1930s when the Nazis came to power. Then he fled here to the United States, graced us here in Chicago with all of his beautiful boxes. Now, one of his students at that Bauhaus in Germany, a Mr. Bertrand Goldberg, would listen to his teacher, but then go on to pretty much reject all of his ideas and build these two curvilinear structures right next door known as the Marina City Towers. Bertrand Goldberg said he was revolting against the straight line, against man made in the image of a machine. He thought buildings should reflect shapes in nature. There are no straight lines or right angles in nature, only curves. So designed very curvilinear buildings like these Marina City Towers here. That sometimes gets them the nickname of the Corn Cob Towers, sort of a corn cob like appearance. But Marina City is also known as a city within a city. You might have noticed, you dock your boat, park your car, you had a restaurant, fitness center, bowling alley, a theater in the back, which is now home to the House of Blues, and of course a place to sleep up top. A paradise for shut-ins, really. But this is supposed to be the appeal behind the building. It was now back in the 1960s, back when the middle class was running out to the suburbs. And every city needs a strong middle-class tax base. So Bertrand Goldberg thought if he could provide all the modern amenities of a city within one building, might keep that strong middle-class tax base here in the city of Chicago. Now we have this low-lying red brick structure here. You might also notice some images of wheat adorning its facade. This is the old Reed Murdoch warehouse, and it is done in the Prairie School of Architecture. The Prairie School was popularized by Frank Lloyd Wright. This building is actually done by George C. Nimmons in 1913. The building is asymmetrical. There is one more bay east of the clock tower. There is here west of the clock tower. Originally, the building was perfectly symmetrical, but by 1930, LaSalle Street Bridge in front of us here is being put in. In order to make way for the street, that just bumped off the base of the building. A new building coming up here. This is an office building around 60 stories tall. Goes by its address, 300 North LaSalle. Now, then the building next to it, it's labeled the Chicago School out from here. It's actually the Helene Curtis building. It was formerly the old Chase and Sanborn Coffee Warehouse, where they say you could still smell the ghosts of old coffee beans haunting the hallways. It's very spooky to some. As those represent the Chicago School of Architecture, a tripartite or three-part design, base, shaft, and capital. We have the white stone base, the red brick shaft, and the all-glass penthouse making cap of the building. We're now coming up to the largest building here in the city of Chicago, as well as the largest building in the world. When it was complete in 1930 by Grant Anderson, Probst & White, has since been surpassed by the Pentagon. It's still is the largest building here in Chicago, though. It's, of course, the Merchandise Mart. And by large, don't mean tall, I just mean very, very large. And like it has 4.4 million square feet of usable floor space, stretched out over the 25 stories. Merchandise Mart takes up 2 city blocks. The post office thought the building was so big, they give it its own zip code. 60654 is just for the Merchandise Mart here. Now, we might have noticed these large heads with the big busts standing out front here on those pedestals. I believe David Letterman once referred to them as the Pez Hall of Fame. And they're actually paying tribute to the great merchant princes of the Chicagoland area, such as Montgomery Ward, Marshall Field, Filene, Wanamaker, Woolworth, among others. Now, the Merchandise Mart was done in a very unfortunate time. I mentioned 1930, the Great Depression was looming here in the United States. Now, originally that building was owned by Marshall Field himself. But by 1945, Marshall Field had to let go of his Merchandise Mart due to owing the government a lot of money in back taxes after that Great Depression hit. And he would sell it to a man who had a little bit of money. Mr. Joseph P. Kennedy of the famous political family would buy the Merchandise Mart for around $13 million, around half its resale value at the time. Use it as a furniture showroom, which it still basically gets used for today. But then by 1998, the Kennedy family would let go of the Merchandise Mart, selling it for somewhere around $600 million. But as we take the turn here, coming up in front of us, there's going to be that bridge standing upright. And if I don't mention it, I can ask the question, why is it standing upright? That's just an old railroad bridge. It's no longer used. So to keep it up like this, just to keep out of the way the boat traffic comes through. And from out here, it is still fully functional, still can go down and then back up again. Just keep it up like this out of convenience sake. It's a really popular spot for wedding photos. Not sure why. And off to the left, a little bit in front of us, there's that pink structure standing there. It's the old Fulton House, an old cold storage warehouse done by Frank Abbott in 1908. And of course, being a cold storage warehouse, did not have any of the windows or balconies you see in it today. The building has been renovated by Harry Weiss and Associates. Renovations were complete in 1981. Harry Weiss said getting involved with the Fulton House was the biggest mistake of his career, as he would have to wait an entire year just for the building to thaw out. And then not to mention punching all the deep holes in the building's facade to make all the windows and balconies you see in it today. If you look into those balconies, you can see just how thick those walls actually are. And all those walls were stuffed with horsehair, a means of insulation in the early 1900s. Smelling pretty awful by the 80s. But Harry Weiss would go on to redeem his reputation, building the River Cottages right next door here in 1988. I'd like to point out the very triangular theme to the River Cottages, a whole bunch of triangles playing out here. I mention it because it seems to me that Harry Weiss was obsessed with the triangle. Now most of his buildings managed to incorporate triangles into them somehow, or are triangles in themselves. I like to say that he was geometrically obsessed. We'll see probably 2 more examples of this in the river today. For now, back off to the right, we have this East Bank Club. It's found in the 1970s. It represents a very old-school way of doing things here on the river. Notice it just sort of has its back turned towards us, not really paying any attention to the river, just ignoring it at all costs. Now, it wasn't until recently they put all the trees and flower pots out back here, now trying to embrace the river. Right across the way, you have a very new school way of doing things, is the Kinsey Park development. You notice that these buildings are set off the riverfront to make for a nice riverfront walkway for pedestrians as well as canines to occasionally enjoy. Now, the reason people used to build like this East Bank Club did is because this Chicago River has been hopelessly polluted throughout the years. One of the most abused waterways in human history, actually. Now, it wasn't until recently we started cleaning up the river here. But the story goes all the way back to the 1850s, back when this big, bustling port city had a lot of barges and schooners running up and down the river here. They were dumping their oil, as well as who knows what else in the river. And Chicago was known as the meatpacking industry's capital to the world. And we were dumping some of those dead carcasses into the Chicago River. And if that wasn't bad enough, Chicago also had all of our city's sewer lines running right here into the Chicago River. So we were dumping all of our raw sewage into the river here. And this wouldn't have been too big of a problem, except for the fact that the Chicago River once flowed into Lake Michigan, which was, and still is, our city's source of drinking water. As you can imagine, poisoning your source of drinking water is not a very good idea. A lot of outbreaks of cholera, typhoid, dysentery, other waterborne illnesses. That's when Chicagoans realized we needed to clean up our city's source of drinking water. The obvious solution might have been to stop throwing stuff into the river, but that didn't occur to anybody at the time. What they thought is we just put water cribs about 2 miles off the shore of Lake Michigan, and getting our water there, being further out, it would be cleaner. Well, apparently it wasn't. So that's when this water reclamation district came into the picture. Remember Centennial Fountain? Here at the beginning of the tour, commemorating that water reclamation district. They were founded in 1889, mainly just to come up with a solution to this whole drinking water problem we had here. And they did come up with a pretty good idea. They thought, why not just reverse the entire flow of this Chicago River? And see, that way, we could keep dumping all of our garbage and all of our sewage into the river here, and it would float south. You know, down the Des Plaines, down the Illinois, down the Mississippi River, and St. Louis could deal with it. Yeah, this is actually what we did. And in 1900, the Ship and Sanitary Canal was complete. Now, the basic idea is that you dredge up so much land from the south branch of the river that it's now lower than this north of the main branch, using Newton's great force of gravity to pull the river the opposite direction. This was a big success. To this day, the river still flows the opposite direction. Our city's source of drinking water was saved. But surprisingly enough, the people of St. Louis were not too thrilled. Now, they actually filed a lawsuit against the city of Chicago. Now, maybe most surprising is that Chicago would go on to win that lawsuit. Now, mainly due to University of Illinois chemistry professor said that when the sun came out, was shining down to these waters, it would oxidize all the pollutants, essentially cleaning the water on its way to St. Louis. Yeah, this isn't really true. But the judge bought it, got us off the hook. Sorry if any of you are from St. Louis. Wasn't my idea, of course. And we haven't been cleaning up the river here lately. It was just like 10 or 15 years ago. The Environmental Protection Agency officially upgraded the status of our river. It was upgraded from toxic to just hazardously polluted now. So, moving in the right direction. With the upgrade, you can go kayaking on the river. It's approved for that recreational use. You can also go fishing. Believe it or not, wildlife has returned. Plenty of fish in the river now. They still don't recommend eating any of the fish, just for sport. But now we have a lot of railways in this area here. Overhead, get that elevated train, runs by every now and then. It is called the L, even though only a third of it is actually elevated. Now, even when it goes underground, we still call it the L, and it is quiet as a mouse. Then off to the right, we have train tracks at the ground level. These train tracks run all the way down the south branch of the river here. See, a long time ago, Chicagoans decided to set aside all this land for the railways, knowing that the east and the west were not connected. Some people coming from the east or the west had to stop here in Chicago and switch trains. And when they'd stop, they'd spend a little bit of money on food or spend the night at a hotel. Just really meant to bolster our economy. This worked fairly well. But it wasn't very long before they realized this is some pretty valuable land. They wanted to use it for something more than just the railways. So they came up with this great idea known as air rights. And the basic idea is that you could buy as much air above the railways as your heart desired. And you can put your building in that air by putting down a bunch of columns alongside the railways so as not to interrupt their flow. But then setting your building on top of those columns, sort of like stilts. The first example of this whole air rights concept is going to be this Boeing World Headquarters coming up in front of us here off to the right, done by Perkins and Will in 1990. It was originally the Morton Salt Building, but again now home to Boeing. And there is this taller tower here, flanked by a shorter one kind of hanging off the side. It's a pretty good reason for that. Now underneath the taller tower, the train tracks run perfectly straight. So there's plenty of room to put down your columns, set building on top of those columns. But under the shorter tower, there's what's known as a switching station. A bunch of train tracks coming together, converging on one spot. No room to put down any columns beneath. So, how do you support this smaller structure if not from below? Well, you hang it from above. There's a system of cantilevered steel trusses on the top of this smaller tower, actually hanging it. The same idea as a diving board on a much larger scale, of course. I'd like to mention that all these columns here, along the ground level of this smaller tower, serve no load-bearing function whatsoever. The architects put them there merely to ease pedestrians' minds. They thought if people saw a floating building, might forget. I do get a great view of those steel trusses up top there, after we clear Washington Street Bridge here. The architects did leave them exposed. Probably marginal. Alright. So, yeah, you do get a great view of those steel trusses up top there. Clear Washington Street Bridge. Again, actually hanging that smaller structure there. But then, straight off to the right, we have Riverside Plaza, the very first building ever done on air rights here in Chicago. It was done by Hullabert and Root in 1929. It was originally the old Daily News building, back when the great American poet Carl Sandburg used to write for us here in the city of Chicago. But again, a very unfortunate time. The Great Depression was looming. Now, original plans actually called for 2 giant sphinx heads, one on each side of the building. I guess King Tut's tomb was discovered in the 20s. Everyone's going through this big Egyptian craze. Well, of course, the Great Depression would hit. Hullabert and Root's budget would be cut. The first thing to go in their budget were the 2 giant sphinx heads they had planned. But now, coming up underneath this next building, you get a pretty good idea of this whole air rights concept. It should be it's like a metro train running underneath here. And you can see all the columns reaching back supporting the building above. And the building above is known as Gateway 1. And if you don't get a really good look at Gateway 1, there's no need to worry. Right next door, there's a building that looks exactly like it, known as Gateway 2. Now, they are known as twin buildings, meant to commemorate 2 twin buildings standing here in Chicago, known as the Butler Brother warehouses. Now, Gateway 1 and 2 were both done by Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill. The first in 1965, the second in 1968. Both in this very modern school of architecture, popularized by Mies van der Rohe, and sometimes called Miesian architecture, using Mies van der Rohe's name as an adjective. And it's just the glass and steel monks look, really. You know, less is more. Well, by 1972, people started saying that less is a bore. And people were getting tired of this whole glass and steel monks look. So Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill decided they would do Gateway 3 as a revolutionary new building. Yes, Gateway 3 would be a glass and stone box. It doesn't really break out that modern school of architecture. But it doesn't fit in either, because the stone cladding is decorational, and modernism is all about stripping back all the ornamentation. So this makes up its own school of architecture called the International School. It's called that because you can pick the building up, put it down in any city in the world, and it'll fit right in. It doesn't pay tribute to its location or anything really. But moving kind of slow here, I'll tell you a quick story about how Chicago got its name. Chicago. It actually comes from a Native American term, Chicagua, or Chicagua, something to that effect. Never seen this before. hard at work, helicoptering through the middle of the city. But no idea what that was all about. I'm sure we'll find out later. But hard to follow that up, really. Pretty tough. I'll tell you about how Chicago had its name later, because right now, off to the right here, we have this building with large X's on its frame. It was originally the Mid-American Commodities Exchange. I believe now home to fitness formula clubs, as well as a corner bakery cafe. Now, I point out those X's because they are not decoration. They're actually serving the load-bearing function of the building. It's called external cross-bracing. You save on 1/3 of your steel when you construct in this manner, because it makes for all wide-open floor space. No need for any interior columns, because the building is literally being held together from the outside. And another building with that same external cross-bracing idea here in Chicago is the John Hancock Center. Much taller building, with the same engineering concept. But now it looks like we have this barge coming through here, kind of the old face of the river. Used to have a whole lot of barges and schooners running up and down the river here. Now it's mostly us tour boats, but every once in a while get a barge that comes through. While we're sitting here, get a pretty good view of that really tall building off to our right. We'll talk more about it on our way back, but if you want to take some pictures, that's a pretty good time. But yeah, while we're sitting here, I guess I will tell you about how Chicago had its name, Chicago. It actually comes from a Native American term, a Chicagua or Chickagoa, something to that effect, which loosely translates as land of the stinking swamp grass, or land of the smelling onions, or skunk cabbage. There are a few translations. They all pretty much include stinking or smelling, because this place did. It was a big swamp. There are these wild patches of onions that grew here. And as they rotted away into the swamp, they emitted a pretty foul odor, kind of characterized this region for quite a period of time. It was later mispronounced as Chicago, unless our name was born. But no Native Americans actually settled in this area. There were endless stretches of beautiful prairie all around this one stinking swamp. Really the only reason Chicago became the city you see here today is this Chicago River. Again, being that connection in through the Great Lakes, going all the way through to the Gulf of Mexico. It's a pretty important river. But now it looks like we're going to be pressing on here, moving forward. Coming up in front of us, we have the final of the Gateway series of buildings. It's known as Gateway 4. It finally breaks into the postmodern school of architecture. And the curve to the building is referencing the slight bend in the river here, as well as all that green tinted glass, again reflecting the green of the river. It was done by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in 1984. Then if you look here near the water level, you might notice this tree. Now it seems to be growing out of nothing more than a chunk of concrete. There are no visible signs of roots whatsoever. I have no idea how that tree continues to exist. I've worked here for over 5 years. That tree continues to thrive. It's my favorite tree of the tour. It's inspiring. But now we're coming up to this large, rundown, sort of jalopy of the building. Now this is actually old post office. And when it was done in 1932 by Graham Anderson, Probst & White, it was the world's largest post office. And if you're wondering why we needed such a giant post office, I'll get to that story once we clear Congress Parkway up here. This tends to be a pretty noisy bridge, especially when traffic picks up. It's usually a bit quiet here as we pass our new. But it looks like Congress Parkway is running right through the old post office. It is. The post office came first, left a big hole in the base of their building, knowing Congress Parkway was going to be built through soon after. This now connects to 290, which is a pretty busy highway here. Either way, take the opportunity to take a deep breath, take some water. If any of you are thirsty, don't forget about Albert downstairs at the full-service bar. He is willing to mix you up whatever your heart desires. It's never too early to start drinking when you're on vacation. We're going back to the post office. Why we needed such a giant one. Chicago is actually the mail order catalog industry's capital to the world. Those start up on Montgomery Ward that are taken off by Sears and Roebuck, and many others, all right here in the city of Chicago. So we thought we needed this giant post office to accommodate all that incoming and outgoing mail, and we were wrong. The main problem with the post office is that it relies too much on its height, having to move the mail up and down the floors, taking days at a time, let alone getting the mail out to the rest of the world. So the building was deemed archaic and inefficient, and it is currently vacant. Now, right next door, we would get this new post office by Knight Architects in 1996. I lovingly call it the new post office. And it does serve its purpose very well. And the mail is laid out just one floor here. The post trucks can actually drive right into the building, pick up their mail, then drive right back out, which should make for some pretty speedy delivery. Now, unfortunately for Knight Architects in 1996, they made sort of a big deal about the grand opening of the new post office here. That first mail truck set to roll through the entranceway. They had all the media come out, all the cameras were rolling. And as that post truck went to roll through the entranceway, it got stuck. Because apparently when they're measuring the height of the post trucks, they measured the height without any tires actually on the truck. So when the first truck came through with tires, it got stuck. And what they had to do was let some of the air onto those tires so it would sink down enough to release itself from the entranceway. Very embarrassing. And of course, since then, the building has been renovated, post trucks going in and out with much ease now. But Knight Architects have not done a building here in Chicago since. But now, off to our left here, we have this very tall building looming here. This is, of course, the Sears Tower. Officially now, it's the Willis Tower. The Willis Insurance Brokerage Company came here from London a few years back. They bought up like 3% of the floor space inside the Sears Tower. And with that 3%, apparently came the naming rights to the building. And they thought they'd make a lot of new friends here in Chicago by renaming the Sears Tower the Willis Tower. So it is officially the Willis Tower, has been for a few years now. I'm just going to keep calling it the Sears Tower, though. So, when the Sears Tower was finished in 1974, at 1,451 feet to the roof, it was good enough to make it the tallest building in the world. That was up until around 1996, when the Petronas Towers in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia surpassed our Sears Tower. Chicagoans are pretty upset about this. We became even more upset when we realized that the only reason the Petronas Towers were considered taller than our Sears Tower is because they had a spire on the top of their buildings. Now, a spire is nothing more than a hollow tube. You can't walk around in a spire. You really can't do anything in a spire. Shouldn't be count. So, Chicagoans decided to do what we do best. Yeah, we complained. To the people who define what's tall and what's not. Surprisingly enough, there is a committee that meets on this and decides. It's the Council for Tall Buildings in the Urban Habitat. They exist. And we got them to create two separate categories. Now we had the world's tallest usable floor space. And the Petronas Towers had the tallest architectural top. Now, of course, all that would go out the window when in Taipei, Taiwan, they built the Taipei 101. Topping out taller than the Sears and the Petronas in both categories. And more recently now, you've probably all heard the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, now the tallest building in the world. No relation to Wiz Khalifa, from what I hear. But that building is something like 2,723 feet. So even if you were to go to the tip of the antennae on top of the Sears Tower there, which I do not recommend doing, that would be 1,725 feet. Still not 1,000 feet shy of that Burj Khalifa. There is still a Chicago connection to the tallest building in the world. That Burj Khalifa was done by Adrian Smith. The Chicago architect did the NBC Tower, as well as Trump's new building here in Chicago. Now we have this pink building off to our right, known just by its address as 311 South Wacker. It was done by Cobb Peterson Fox in 1990. They had a unique problem of designing their building right next to the world-famous Sears Tower. So how do you outshine the Sears Tower? How do you steal some attention away from it? Well, first you clad your building in pink Texas granite. Makes it stand out a little bit. Then you make it a weird octagon-like shape. Nobody's really using the octagon to its fullest potential nowadays. But then finally, you literally outshine the Sears Tower by putting a giant steel drum on the top of your building and filling it with around 2,000 fluorescent light bulbs. So when lit up at night, it is the brightest building in our city skyline. Now, off in front of us, we have this white building here. If you look to the top, there's a triangular section shooting up about 13 stories taller than the rest of the building. This was done by none other than Harry Weiss and Associates, the man I mentioned who seems to be obsessed with the triangle. Just another interesting way of incorporating triangles into buildings. Now, if you look in between these next two buildings, there's that nice clearing. Get one last view of the Sears Tower here. See it from the base all the way up to the roof. And if you look all the way to the top, you should be able to make out those glass balconies hanging off the side. It's a new observatory. Take a step out onto those, take a look straight down. Now, I still have not been up there due to sheer terror. Horrified of heights. I'm also scared of boats. And helicopters. Public speaking. Now, could you imagine climbing the Sears Tower? Like from the outside, climbing up it. It's been done twice. Now, the first time it was done by Dan Goodwin in 1981. The second time, more famously, was done by Alain Robert, a French daredevil with the nickname of Spider-Man. Now, he did it in 1999 without any safety riggings. No nets, no ropes, no safety harnesses whatsoever. Walked up to the building, started climbing. And he did make it all the way to the top, and he was greeted there by Chicago's finest. And he was arrested for trespassing, performing an aerial show without a net, and some other charges. Eventually they'll let him go, should be fine. But the Sears Tower is done in a 9-bundle tube construction. If you think of 9 sticks gathered together for strength, that's basically how they find it. Now, of course, each of those sticks is actually a 75 by 75 foot building. 2 of them go to the 50th floor, 2 to the 66th, 3 to the 90th floor, then 2 all the way to the 110-story top. With this bundled tube construction, the Sears Tower can actually sway 3 feet in either direction near the top. That's called the enforcements. Now, off to the right, we have the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, or the MERC for short. The 2 40-story towers are flanking what used to be the central trade floor here. It was done by Fujikawa Johnson Associates in 1987. They had a unique problem of designing 40,000 square feet of uninterrupted floor space in the center here. And the traders do all the signaling, jumping around, they tend to do. And they were worried that when they put in that trade floor with all the weight settling and pulling on the 2 towers, the towers might start to cave inward. So what they did was very slightly bow outward. The 2 towers they're constructing, it's like 1/8 of an inch each floor. So when the trade floors put in, all that weight settled and pulled in the 2 towers, just pulling straight. It's unique engineering. But that trade floor is no longer the MERC's trade floor. They merged with the Board of Trade here in Chicago a few years back. I believe BP trades in there now. But now we have the Civic Opera building here, as it is very clearly labeled. This is, of course, back when we spelled building with a V, I guess. We do nickname this building Insol's Throne. So if you crane your neck back, you might be able to make out in the shape of a giant armchair or throne. And it was commissioned by a man of the name Samuel Insull, the utilities king here in the city of Chicago. Worked for Thomas Edison in his heyday. Again, the building was commissioned by Mr. Insull, who was the original owner of the building. It was actually built by Graham Anderson Probst and White in 1929. Again, a very unfortunate time, the Great Depression was looming. Mr. Insull would lose a lot of money, as well as his opera building here. And instead of consoling him, Chicagoans decided to make fun of him, saying that upon Mr. Insull's death, his spirit would rise up and sit on his mighty throne. So that's actually the nickname of Insull's Throne. And there are a lot of different stories out there about why the building has that throne-like shape to it. One of them says that Mr. Insull had a daughter who went to New York to try her hand at opera. And she was so bad that she got booed all the way back here to the city of Chicago. So Mr. Insull decided to build her own opera building with its back turned to New York. And there's a similar story, just instead of his daughter saying his wife. And another story saying he was upset with his downtown investors after the Great Depression hit. So he had the building built with its back turned to the downtown office buildings here in Chicago. Now, the more likely story is probably just due to a zoning ordinance. This put in place in 1923. Not nearly as thrilling. It said that only a quarter of your building could rise to its full height. The rest had to be the city-ordained height. And the lower section of the opera building there is actually where the opera stage is, so it can't support any higher floor space. But now off to the right, we have this red brick structure with all the ivy adorning its facade. This stands on a very historic site. It was right here in 1860 that a makeshift wooden structure known as the Wigwam was put up. The Wigwam was put up and taken down all within about a month, only to house one convention, the Republican National Convention of 1860, where we nominated Illinois' own Abraham Lincoln to run for president that year. So a pretty historic spot there. Good old Honest Abe was nominated. Then we have this building with a big curved glass front to it here. It goes by its address as 333 West Wacker. Kind of like to read like a Soundfinder or something. Their addresses, both Confidence and Fox buildings. But 333 West Wacker is another postmodern building. Again, postmodernism, known for its contextualism or just paying tribute to its location. Here you have alternating shades of green glass, reflecting the green of the river. The big curve to the front of the building, referencing the big bend in the river here. As well as some circular vents near the base of the building, which are just meant to reflect portholes on a ship. So they're just paying tribute to its location near the Chicago River. Now right next door, Count Peterson Fox also do this building, 225 West Wacker. Again, just going by its address, and again having a circular vent in the front, as well as some circular windows along the sides, reflecting portholes on a ship. I'd like to mention the central section of windows here, because they're separated by these spandrels that have 4 rivets in a square. Now, why decorate your building with rivets? Seems like an odd decorating choice. Now, what do I have to do? Your answer? One of many Chicago bridges and all the rivets on them. Yeah, this is what postmodernism is all about, just paying tribute to your surroundings. And Chicago is actually known for having the most movable bridges of any city in the world. At one time we had around 52 movable bridges, now we're down to about 36. They're all still fully functional, so go up and down whenever need be. And it's still far more than any other city in the world. So we have the most movable bridges here in Chicago. And you mostly just see them going up and down on Wednesdays and Saturdays, certain times of the year. The weather starts to warm up, all the sailboats head out onto the lake. When it starts to cool down, they all head back down the river. And they set aside those 2 days a week for bridge openings when sailboats come through. Now off to the right we have what was known as the Builders Building. It was done in the 1920s by Graham Anderson, Probst & White. You might notice the nice annex put on the side here, the big bay windows sticking out. This building was renovated in the 1980s by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. They threw on that annex there. I like to point it out because it makes a lot of references to the original structure and paying tribute to the original design. And that still stands out in its own right with those big bay windows sticking out there. Next door we have the LaSalle Wacker building. This is the remnants of that old city ordinance I mentioned really briefly. As in 1923, city officials thought they were scientists. They came up with this idea known as the Canyon Effect. What's something like this? They said if buildings here in Chicago kept rising so tall, eventually they would block out all the sunlight and the air to the streets below. Slowly transforming Chicagoans into a race of mole people scurrying about in the streets. I tacked on that last bit myself. But they did say that only a quarter of your building could rise to its full height. The rest had to be at a ordained height to make way for the sunlight and air to get on the streets below. That ordinance has long since been thrown out. In case you're wondering what a Greek temple might look like if you were to stretch it to 50 stories tall, Ricardo Bofield has your answer, 77 West Wacker. Originally the R.R. Donnelly building, I believe now home to United Airlines. I mentioned this building mainly because of how beautiful it looks at night. This is the night sky turns black, most of the windows in this building also turn black, and all those columns are lit up. So you just get this view of a giant Greek temple going up in the night sky there. It's a pretty great view later. A couple doors down we have this tall plaid-looking building, 35 West Wacker, home to the Leo Burnett Advertising Agency, or the Leo Burnett building. This represents another idea in postmodernism. Just take a small piece of architecture, put it on a broader scale. This time taking the classical column and expanding upon it. I notice the entire building, some giant column standing there. That's reflected in the base of the building, with all the columns there surrounding the base. Now if you look off in front of us, past Morton's, the steakhouse, there's that green building with all the gold leafing at the top. And it's supposed to look like a giant champagne bottle. It was done by the Burnham brothers back in the Prohibition years, back when alcohol was banned here in the United States. There's a been missing their champagne bottles. Originally the Carbide and Carpet building, I believe now home to the Harbor Hotel. Now pull your attention to the ground level. Off to the right we do have Chicago Remembers. This is the largest Vietnam War memorial outside of Washington, D.C. It's right here now, straight off to the right. And the building above it, along the dome in each corner, then the big center dome, was originally known as the Julie